going to be great for your country. We're going to get this done. And then Zelensky keeps trying to retrade the deal during the press conference. And I think the analysis of you need to read the room and understand where you are now. You're not, this is not the Biden administration. I know you've been talking with all the Biden people about what you should and shouldn't do. And it's really, they're very desperate for Trump not to have a win. But you've got Hegseth in there, you've got JD, you've got other people that met with you, including the Treasury Secretary, who you haven't been really cooperative over the last week. And you've been saying some things that are not helpful. And you come in and you're my chest is puffed up. You will do what I say. And I think JD had enough. And so he just threw the whole thing out there. You know, he made his statement about diplomacy. He made his statement about what the country wanted to do. I think the turning point was when Zelensky said that you have this big ocean and you don't feel war, but someday you will. Or to that extent, I'm paraphrasing. But that is when Trump
that's when
was
Trump
like,
engaged.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
You're not going to know what we're going to feel or not feel. And that's when he had, and yes, did JD kind of throw the grenade out there? I think there's some truth to that. But I think JD could already see things going off the rails. And at that point, it just, you're right. It just blew up.
Well, and I mean, look, at the end of the day, Trump is a deal maker. And so he saw that things weren't going as expected from the standpoint. I mean, literally, this was just supposed to be a pro forma, like the deal was done. We just need to sign the paperwork, have lunch, toast. And, that didn't work. It didn't happen. So he was like, nope, we're going to walk away. And then he pulls aid, announced a couple days ago. And Europe does this emergency meeting and says, oh, we're going to help you. And Zelensky's reaction, Mr. Trump, I'd like to have that deal, because he recognizes that Europe can't do what the Americans can do.
No, the aid that they were proposing was paltry. It was peanuts. And by the way, their equipment, they have nothing. People forget Europe's security guarantee is America. And we had this discussion last week, I think, with Mark. We have how many, and we were talking about this yesterday. How many bases do we have in Germany? 4, 5, 100,000 troops? It's why the Germans, tout their welfare state, as the example of the world, because we're their security guarantee.
Yeah. Well, and I have been giving this some thought over the last week. And because I have, as I said on the podcast with Thiessen, and I've said it in previous podcasts, that I am, I revere Reagan. And so when it came to, conflict with Russia, I've always been anti-Russia, anti-Soviets.
Yeah.
And have constantly said, look, the supporting the Ukrainians is a really good deal, ROI, on destroying Soviet military capability,
which they've
done.
800,000 Russians are dead.
And now but as I've looked at the reaction of the European Union and the member states of NATO, I don't think it is outside the realm of discussion, which has been floated, that the United States leaves NATO. And that's very dramatic. That'd be a very dramatic move.
But no one has proposed that. And even Trump hasn't proposed that. The only thing that Trump has proposed is that NATO, the countries in NATO, pay their fair share.
Yeah. Well, but there's got to be a consequence if they don't. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, as a person who appreciated what Reagan did in taking down communism, I feel like the Europeans have absolutely crapped the bed when it came to their responsibilities with NATO.
Now, completely.
That's just abundantly clear. And if it takes the threat of the United States leaving NATO to get them in gear, I'm all for it. Because at the end of the day, the purpose of NATO was to stop
Russian.
Nazi, well, it was stop the Nazis, which they did, but then to stop communism, right? Was to stop the spread of communism.
Yeah.
And we succeeded. I mean, we succeeded. The communism fell. I mean, there's still obviously China and Putin is, make no mistake, he's communist. But when Biden was so weak as to telegraph to Putin, now's the time to go, dude. And the Europeans did basically nothing to protect Ukraine, then it showed that NATO was useless.
Well, I'm glad you finally said it. The Europeans have been morally bankrupt in their obligations to not only themselves, but to their obligations to NATO and the EU for quite some time. And I think J.D. Vance was right to go to Europe in the last 2 weeks ago,
right,
and call them out on both their moral, depravity in terms of free speech and jailing people for praying in front of abortion clinics and crazy stuff like that, but also their lack of commitment to the alliance, to the greatest alliance that has ever been created.
Yeah.
And that commitment is now shining through because of what has happened in Ukraine. And it's America that's having to go in, thankfully, because of groups like AEI and Mark Thiessen and have come up with a way that to resurrect Ukraine, to rebuild the country, and still get repaid.
Yeah.
And make it an economic deal. That seems totally foreign to the Europeans.
Right. Well, because they've gotten a free pass.
That's like, why
60 years.
Why is America doing that? That doesn't seem fair. It's like, we have 170, 200, 300 billion in it, whatever number you want to use, depending on what you're looking at. And to Trump, he looks at the arc of history as America gets repaid. And you've said this really well on the show. America gets repaid for what we do. And if we're not going to, somehow we're going to get repaid for Ukraine.
Well, and it's ultimately it's the minerals deal.
And right? I don't know if our listeners are going to like this, but two things can be true at the same time. And I think Zelensky proved it the other day. Putin can be a mass murderer and an evil person, and Zelensky can still be a comedian and a clown.
Well,
and he made it clear he wanted the train to keep rolling. He wanted the money to keep rolling. He didn't want peace. I think that's totally true. And he got smacked on it. He got called out on it because, no, you don't seem to understand. There's a new sheriff in town. The money's gone. We've got to end the war. You're going to accept what we negotiate because you're not in a position. What Trump kept saying during the press conference, you hold no cards.
Yeah, there are no cards.